David had never imagined that his life would take such an unexpected turn. A simple man from Earth, he never thought he'd find himself on another planet, standing before a crowd of alien dignitaries, preparing to marry someone he had never met. Yet here he was in a grand hall made of shimmering glass and metal, under the watchful eyes of beings from 100 different worlds. The invitation had come out of the blue, as sudden as it was mysterious. Earth had been contacted by an advanced alien race, the Zyrexians, who had been watching humanity from afar. Their technology, so much more advanced than anything on Earth, had captivated the human race. When the Zyrexian Council decided to form an intergalactic alliance with Earth, they saw it as the perfect opportunity to strengthen ties by uniting their cultures in a most personal way, through marriage. The marriage was to be symbolic, a human ambassador marrying an alien representative. David, a man who had lived his life as an average citizen, had been chosen for the role. He wasn't a diplomat, nor was he famous. He wasn't even a soldier. But somehow he had been selected. Why? Him? He didn't know. But when they told him he'd be marrying an alien woman as part of the alliance, his heart had raced with a mix of fear and curiosity. The ceremony was like nothing David had ever seen. The grand hall was filled with beings whose shapes, sizes, and colors ranged from beautiful to bizarre. Some were tall and graceful, others were small and squat, but all were watching with eager eyes. Every being present had a role in this momentous occasion. David stood there, his palms sweating, trying to focus on the ceremony, but his thoughts kept wandering to the woman who would soon become his wife. David had met her earlier that day, but only for a brief moment. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was a soft pale blue with a touch of violet, almost glowing under the lights. Her eyes were large, silver, and far too deep for him to read. Her long hair flowed in soft waves, a mixture of blue and silver, giving her an ethereal look. She had the grace of someone who had lived for centuries, yet the mystery of someone who had just been born. Her name was Lyra, though David had no idea if that was even her real name or if it was simply what she had been given for this occasion. She was a representative of the Zyrexian people, chosen to unite with humanity in this strange and powerful alliance. But despite her beauty, there was something in her eyes, something distant, that made David feel uneasy. As the ceremony began, Lyra stood at the altar, her presence commanding the attention of the entire room. David couldn't help but feel out of place. He was just a man, average, human, and suddenly thrust into the spotlight of intergalactic politics. The alien counselors around him seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to happen, while David couldn't shake the thought that this marriage was more than just symbolic. David was told that this union would help solidify Earth's position in the universe. He didn't fully understand what it meant, but the Zyrexians had promised that their advanced technology would benefit humanity for generations to come. This marriage, this bond between him and Lyra, was a gesture of goodwill, a promise of peace and cooperation between worlds. When the Zyrexian High Ambassador raised a hand, signaling the beginning of the vows, David's heart skipped a beat. It was time. The reality of what he was about to do finally hit him like a ton of bricks. The whole world was watching. His marriage wasn't just to a woman, it was a political statement. It was something bigger than both of them. He turned to Lyra, and she met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. A strange mix of emotions filled David. There was an undeniable beauty about her, a calming aura that made him want to trust her. But there was also a wall behind her eyes, something that told him she was not entirely like him, not entirely human. Do you, David of Earth, take Lyra of the Zyrexian people to be your partner in this union? The ambassador asked. David's mind raced. He had never thought about marriage this way, had never imagined it would be with an alien in front of so many watching eyes, with the weight of intergalactic peace hanging in the balance. But as he looked at Lyra, something about her seemed to pull him in, something he couldn't explain. I do, he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Lyra, though still distant, gave a small nod, and, in that moment, David felt a strange connection. She wasn't like any woman he had known. There was a depth to her that seemed to go on forever. But what was it that made her so distant, so enigmatic? "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the ambassador declared. A wave of applause filled the room, but David barely heard it. He was too focused on the woman beside him. There was so much he didn't know, so much he was about to discover. As the ceremony came to a close, David and Lyra were escorted to their quarters. The hallways of the Zyrexian palace were vast and silent, lit by soft lights that cast long shadows across the walls. The silence was almost too much. He could hear his own heartbeat, and the sound of his footsteps echoed through the marble floors. When they reached their room, the door slid open, revealing a lavish suite. The walls were made of shimmering crystals, and the furniture was sleek and alien, with curves that David had never seen before. Lyra stepped inside first, her movements graceful, as though she belonged here. David hesitated at the doorway, looking around, his mind still trying to grasp what had just happened. This was his life now, married to an alien, on a strange world, surrounded by beings who were not human. He had no idea what to expect next, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of something far more complex than he could ever have imagined. As he entered the room, Lyra turned to face him, her eyes still unreadable. "Welcome," she said softly, her voice like a melody. But David couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden in her words, something more than just the formality of their marriage. Their first night together was about to begin, and with it, the mystery of who Lyra truly was and what their marriage truly meant was about to unfold. The silence in the room was thick. David stood there, staring at his new wife, Lyra, as she gracefully moved around their quarters, preparing for their first night together. Her movements were fluid, almost too perfect, like someone following a well-practiced routine. He watched as she adjusted the shimmering curtains, the light catching her long silver-blue hair and making it glisten like stardust. Everything about her seemed otherworldly. The room was large, filled with strange alien furniture that David had never seen before. Everything seemed so polished, so futuristic. There were no sharp edges, no rough surfaces. The walls were made of smooth, glass-like material, and the soft light that filtered through the room gave it an almost ethereal glow. The furniture looked sleek and elegant, each piece seeming to serve both beauty and function in ways David didn't fully understand. Yet, as out of place as it all seemed, it was still stunning. But nothing was as stunning as Lyra. David couldn't stop himself from looking at her even as she moved about the room. Her beauty was undeniable, a perfect blend of alien and human-like traits. Her soft, pale blue skin seemed to shimmer in the ambient light, and her large silver eyes were both captivating and unnerving. She was so different from any woman David had ever met. Her presence filled the room, and yet there was a distance to her that he couldn't quite place. She wasn't like the women he had known back on Earth. There was something about her that seemed more distant, more removed. He couldn't figure it out. Was it just because she was an alien, or was it something deeper? Maybe it was just the weight of the entire situation. Married to an alien, representing Earth in a grand intergalactic alliance. David took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had never been one to overthink things. Yet, every time he tried to focus on something, his thoughts seemed to wander back to Lyra. "Lyra," he said, testing the sound of her name on his lips. It felt strange. She turned to face him, her eyes softening just slightly. "Yes, David." He felt a rush of warmth flood his chest, but the unease was still there. I don't know what to say. This is all so new to me." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "It is new to me as well," she replied, her voice calm and melodic. "But I was trained for this. This is my role, and yours is to represent your people." David tried to make sense of her words. She wasn't acting like a typical bride. She spoke with an almost robotic calmness, as though she were simply following an instruction. Was this how it was supposed to be? Was this how alien marriages worked? The more he tried to understand, the more questions seemed to arise. The silence stretched between them, and David, feeling a bit lost, took a tentative step forward. "I don't know what to expect," he admitted. "I've never done this before. I've never been married. I mean, I didn't even know I was going to get married today, let alone to an alien woman." Lyra remained still for a moment, her eyes never leaving him. There was something in her gaze, something too deep for him to understand, but it was also kind? Or maybe it was just pity. He couldn't tell. I understand," she said softly, her tone gentle yet distant. "This is a union of necessity, not of love. But in time, perhaps you will understand that it is more than just a contract." David wanted to ask more questions. He wanted to know what she meant. Was she saying that love wasn't part of the deal? That it was only about the alliance? But as he stood there, looking into her silver eyes, he found himself hesitant. There was something about her, something that made him feel both at ease and on edge. She had finished arranging the room, and now she turned back to him. "Are you hungry?" she asked, her voice soft, though it had a strange undercurrent. "The Zyrexian cuisine is different, but you may find it to your liking." David was about to say no, but something about her offer made him reconsider. He was, after all, on an alien planet, married to an alien woman. There was no harm in trying something new, right? "Sure, I'll try it," he said, a bit of uncertainty creeping into his voice. Lyra moved swiftly to a sleek silver console built into the wall. With a few delicate touches, a small holographic display appeared, showing an array of alien dishes. The colors were vibrant, with strange shapes and textures that David could only guess at. His stomach grumbled softly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten much since he arrived. After a brief moment, Lyra selected a dish, and within seconds, a small serving of food appeared on the table. The aroma was unfamiliar, spicy yet sweet, with hints of something earthy that David couldn't identify. David sat at the table and Lyra joined him across from him. As he picked up the utensil, he tried not to stare at her too much. She ate with grace, but there was something about her that kept him on edge. She wasn't acting like a woman who had just been married. She was almost too composed, as if her emotions were kept carefully controlled. The meal itself was unlike anything David had ever tasted. Flavors he had never encountered, some too strong, some oddly satisfying. He could feel the food filling him up, but his mind remained occupied by the questions he had about his bride. She was perfect, but why was she so distant? And why did she seem to have no real reaction to their marriage? After a few moments of silence, David finally spoke. "Lyra, can I ask you something?" She looked up at him, her silver eyes meeting his. "Of course. Do you feel anything about this, about us being married? I mean, this is all so unexpected. Don't you have any thoughts on it?" She set her utensil down, her gaze becoming distant once more. "I have been trained to serve my people and to follow their customs. My role is clear to me. I do not have the same concept of marriage as you do. My purpose is to help guide our peoples toward unity. This marriage is a step toward that." David didn't know how to respond. Her words were so matter-of-fact, so devoid of emotion, that it left him wondering if she saw him as nothing more than a tool for the alliance. Was this just business to her? Was there nothing personal involved? As he sat there, watching her, he realized he didn't know who Lyra really was. The woman before him seemed so perfect, so distant, and yet he felt drawn to uncover the truth. There was something behind those silver eyes, something hidden beneath the surface. But what was it? And could he ever truly understand her? The night was still young, but David knew that what he had just discovered was only the beginning. There was far more to Lyra than met the eye, and as their first night together unfolded, he would soon learn just how much more. David had always imagined his first night of marriage to be something special, something filled with emotions, surprises, and the promise of a deep connection. But as he sat across from Lyra, his alien bride, he couldn't help but feel a growing unease. There was a strange tension between them, an invisible wall that he couldn't break through no matter how hard he tried. The Zyrexian palace was vast and luxurious, its walls made of smooth, glimmering materials reflecting the soft light that bathed the room in an almost dreamlike glow. But despite the beauty of the surroundings, David couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The vastness of the room, the strange alien furniture, and the eerie silence only made him feel more alone. The quiet between him and Lyra stretched on, thick and heavy. They had just finished their strange meal. The flavors were still lingering on his tongue, the taste of the food unlike anything he had ever encountered on Earth. Some of the dishes were spicy, others sweet, and a few had a peculiar tang he couldn't quite place. But the food wasn't what was making his stomach churn. It was the thought of what was happening tonight, what his marriage meant, and the strange woman sitting across from him. Lyra sat there, her posture perfect, her silver eyes fixed on the soft light above them. She wasn't looking at him, not with the warmth and curiosity that David had hoped for. No, she was distant, cold, almost robotic. It was as if she were merely playing a role, following a script she had memorized long ago. David cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. Lyra, about our marriage, His voice faltered as she looked up at him, her eyes locking onto his with a calmness that made him feel even more uneasy. There was no emotion in her gaze, no warmth or excitement that he had hoped, for she was just there. Do you not feel anything about this? He asked, his voice softer now. About us being married? I don't know what I expected, but this feels so strange. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as though contemplating his words. After a long pause, she spoke in her usual calm, measured tone. I do not experience emotions the way you do, David. My purpose is not to feel, but to serve, to bring peace between our worlds. I was created for this, and now I am bound to you as part of this union. David's heart sank. He had suspected something like this, but hearing her say it out loud made it more real. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She wasn't here because of love or even the possibility of love. She was here because of duty, because it was her role in this strange alliance between their worlds. I see, David murmured, his mind racing. He had to admit a part of him had hoped there was more to it. Some chance for a real connection, some chance to understand the woman he was married to. But instead, he found himself facing a cold, distant stranger. The silence between them grew, once again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just awkward, it was unsettling, as if the very air in the room was pressing down on him. He glanced around, trying to find something, anything to distract him from the feeling of being trapped in this strange situation. But nothing helped. The room was too foreign, too perfect, and too empty. Lyra, David said, his voice stronger. Now, can you at least tell me about yourself? Where you're from, what your life is like, what you want? I mean, I don't even know if you have wants or dreams. I don't know anything about you. Her gaze softened, just a little. I'm from Zyrexia, she said, her voice calm. I was born there, created for the sole purpose of fostering alliances with other civilizations. I do not have personal desires, as you might understand them. My existence is focused solely on the unity of our people with yours. David tried to process her words. She wasn't like him. She didn't have the same thoughts, the same emotions. She was different, created for a purpose. And yet, she was sitting here, across from him, in this strange palace, bound to him in marriage. He felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was a living being, but it seemed as if she had no freedom, no choice in what her life had become. I don't know what to say, David admitted, feeling a strange mix of frustration and pity. It just doesn't seem fair. You're not a tool, you're a person. Why don't you have the right to live your own life? Lyra was silent for a long time, her silver eyes looking distant again. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer this time. It is not about fairness, David. It is about duty. We are all created for a purpose, and mine is to serve the greater good. I have no need for personal desires or freedom. My existence is tied to the success of this alliance. David couldn't help but feel a deep sadness wash over him. She was trapped, bound to a life she hadn't chosen, forced into a role she had no say in. Her calm demeanor, her lack of emotion, it all made sense now. She wasn't just an alien bride, she was a product, created for a single purpose, and that purpose had nothing to do with love or companionship. "Do you ever wish for more?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's gaze met his again, and for the first time David saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of sadness, perhaps, or regret. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the same distant calm. "I do not wish for anything, David. I exist to fulfill my duty." David sat back, his mind reeling. He had been so focused on the idea of this marriage, so caught up in the thought of what it could be, that he hadn't stopped to consider what it might mean for Lyra. She wasn't like him. She didn't have the same freedoms, the same choices. She was a product of her world, created to serve, to bring about peace. And yet, as he looked at her, as he watched her sit there, so composed, so perfect, he couldn't help but feel that there was more to her than she was letting on. There had to be. "Maybe one day you'll understand," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. "Maybe you'll see that this is what I am meant to do. What we both are meant to do." David didn't know what to say. Instead, he simply nodded, the weight of their situation settling heavily in his chest. The night was still young, but he knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The night stretched on, and the weight of the silence between David and Lyra grew heavier with each passing minute. David sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. His mind buzzed with questions about Lyra, about their marriage, and most of all about what it meant for their future. He had tried to get to know her, but so far she seemed like an enigma, wrapped in mystery and cold detachment. Lyra, meanwhile, stood near the window, her eyes focused on the distant stars outside. She was calm, composed, almost serene, but David could feel the distance between them like a physical barrier. Despite being married, despite sitting together in the same room, he felt as if they were oceans apart. His thoughts wandered to the strange document he had found earlier in the room, tucked away in a drawer beneath a false bottom. He hadn't meant to snoop, but curiosity had gotten the better of him. The document had been written in an unfamiliar script, filled with words he couldn't understand. But there was one thing that caught his eye: the mention of Lyra's name and a series of codes and numbers that seemed to be tied to her very existence. David couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Lyra wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just his wife, chosen for an intergalactic alliance. There was something more, something hidden that she wasn't telling him. As the silence dragged on, David stood up and walked toward her. He had to know the truth. There was no more room for doubts. The discovery had left him restless, and the more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. "Lyra." David's voice broke through the stillness of the room. She turned slowly, her silver eyes meeting his. Her face was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze. A flicker of something, perhaps hesitation. "I found something," David continued, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "In the drawer. It was a document, one with your name on it. It was strange. There were codes and numbers, and I couldn't make sense of them. But it didn't feel right. I need to know what it was." For a moment, Lyra didn't respond. Her eyes remained locked on his, but her expression was difficult to read. The quiet stretched between them once again, thick with tension. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than before. "You found it," she murmured. "I knew you would eventually." David's heart raced. "What is it, Lyra? What does it mean?" Lyra took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before she met his eyes once again. It is the truth of who I am, she said slowly. The truth of why I am here, why I am with you. David's mind whirled. You're not just a bride. You're not just part of some political alliance, are you? There's something more to you, something you've been hiding. She nodded, a small, almost sad smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You are right. I'm not just a bride, David. I was not created for love or companionship. I was created for a purpose far greater than either of those things. I am a product of advanced Zyrexian science, a creation designed to serve the greater good of both, our people. David's breath caught in his throat. His mind struggled to process her words. What do you mean, created? You're not real? He asked, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. I am real, David, she said, her voice firm but gentle. I am a sentient being, capable of thought and feeling, but I was engineered. My existence was designed with one purpose in mind. To form a bridge between our worlds to ensure the success of this alliance. David's head spun. But you're a person. You have feelings. You're not just some experiment, right? You're not just a tool. You have to be more than that. Lyra's eyes softened and she took a step toward him. I do have feelings, David. But they are different. I do not experience emotions the way humans do. My purpose is to study and understand the complexities of human emotion, to learn how our two species can coexist and thrive together. Was created to help make that happen. David felt a pang in his chest, a strange mix of sadness and sympathy. So, you're not here because you wanted to be? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's gaze faltered for just a moment, but then she straightened, her posture as perfect as ever. No, David, I am not here because I wanted to be. I was chosen. I was created for this purpose, and I accepted it. It is my duty, my responsibility. And now I am bound to you just as you are bound to me. David struggled to find the right words, his thoughts racing. He had married her thinking it was a simple alliance, a symbol of peace. But now the truth was clear. Lyra wasn't just a person like him. She was an experiment, a being created for a specific role in a much larger plan. She was the product of a highly advanced species, designed to help guide the future of their two worlds. But at what cost? I don't know what to say, David said, his voice shaky. I thought we could have something real, something of our own. But it feels like I'm part of a plan, part of a larger system that I don't even understand. Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time she seemed almost vulnerable. You are part of something real, David, she said quietly. You are part of something that can change the course of history. But it is not a journey without its challenges. I was created for this, but it does not mean I do not care. I may not experience emotions the same way you do, but I do not want you to think that this is meaningless. David looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something that wasn't just about duty, wasn't just about the alliance. Was it hope? Was it longing? He couldn't tell. But in that moment, David realized that there was more to Lyra than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just a creation. She wasn't just a tool. She was a person, and in her own way, she was searching for meaning in a life that had been dictated by others. Then let's figure this out, David said, his voice filled with determination. We may have been thrown together for reasons we didn't choose, but that doesn't mean we can't find something real, something that's ours. Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, David saw a genuine smile on her lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And as the night stretched on, David knew that this was just the beginning. The truth about Lyra, about their marriage, and about their future was still unfolding. But one thing was certain: they would face it together. David sat in the middle of the vast, unfamiliar room, his thoughts tangled in confusion and disbelief. The truth that Lyra had revealed to him had shattered everything he thought he knew. She wasn't just a bride, not just a symbol of an intergalactic alliance. She was something much more complex, something beyond his understanding. She was an engineered being, created for a single purpose. His mind raced as he thought about everything he had been told. Lyra wasn't like other women. She wasn't a woman at all, not in the way he understood the word. She was a creation, a being designed to study human emotions, a living experiment. And yet, despite all of that, there was something in her eyes when she spoke. A flicker of emotion, a glimpse of something that seemed almost human. David had tried to wrap his mind around it, but it was difficult. He had been thrown into this marriage without warning, without choice. He had been led to believe that it was an opportunity, a chance to represent Earth in a new era of peace and cooperation. But now, it felt more like a trap, a grand plan, in which he was just a pawn. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being played, that everything was orchestrated, and that his feelings didn't matter. Lyra's calm, almost mechanical responses had unsettled him. She wasn't like a Nyon he had ever known. There was a distance between them, something intangible that made it impossible to feel truly connected to her. But despite all the questions, despite all the confusion, David knew that one thing had to be clear. He needed to confront her. He needed to know the truth, all of it. No more secrets, no more half-answers. He stood up, his legs heavy, as if the weight of his thoughts was dragging him down. The quiet of the room felt oppressive, the silence only adding to his growing frustration. Lyra was standing by the window again, looking out at the stars, her posture poised and perfect as always. But her stillness only made David feel more distant, more isolated. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I need to understand. I can't keep living like this, in this strange, half-understood world. You told me the truth about who you are, but there's more to it, isn't there? There has to be more." Lyra didn't turn to face him immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the stars outside, but David could see her shoulders tense, her body stiffen. She knew what was coming. "I've been patient, Lyra," David continued, taking a step toward her. "I've tried to accept everything, this marriage, our situation. But I can't keep pretending that I don't have questions. I need to know the full truth. I need to understand why I'm here, why we're here. I thought I was part of something bigger, something meaningful. But now it feels like everything's a lie." She finally turned to face him, her eyes soft, but still distant. There was a flicker of something in them, maybe a hint of regret, but it quickly faded into the calm, controlled expression that David had grown so familiar with. "I told you the truth, David," Lyra said, her voice low but firm. "I was created to unite our people, to serve the Alliance. I don't have the luxury of personal desires. I was made for this, just as you were chosen for this role. There is no other reason for me to be here." David's chest tightened. "But I'm not a part of your plan, Lyra. I'm not just a piece of a bigger puzzle. I'm a person and I have feelings. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be thrown into a marriage that's based on duty, not choice. Do you even care about that? Do you care about how I feel?" Lyra took a slow, measured breath, her gaze drifting to the floor for a moment. David could see that this was difficult for her, but she didn't show it. Her calmness never wavered, like a wall that couldn't be broken. "I do care, David," she said quietly, finally meeting his gaze again. "I understand your frustration, your confusion, but my existence was never about choice. It was about purpose. I was created for a specific reason, and that reason is greater than any one person. I never had the luxury of wondering what I wanted. My life, my purpose, it was all mapped out for me before I was even born." David's heart sank. He knew it wasn't her fault. He knew she didn't have control over her own life. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. The woman sitting in front of him, his wife, was not like him. She didn't have the same freedoms, the same ability to make choices. She was bound to a life that had been decided for her long before they had ever met. "But what about us, Lyra?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about me? What about the two of us? Is there anything real here, or are we just following a script like you said?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a few steps closer to him, her movements slow, deliberate. She stopped just a few feet away from him, her gaze intense, her silver eyes locked onto his. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice tinged with something David couldn't quite place. "I don't know what it means to be real, David. I don't know what it means to truly choose someone, but I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to learn. Not because I was told to, but because I want to." David's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, there was something in her voice, something real. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She wasn't just the perfect, emotionless creation he had imagined. There was more to her, something that went beyond her purpose, something that made her more than just an experiment. "You're trying?" David repeated, almost in disbelief. "You're trying to understand what it means to choose? To feel something real?" Lyra nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I've never had the chance to make my own choices, David. But I want to understand. I want to know what it means to be more than just a tool for others. I want to understand what it means to truly connect with another person." David stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. In that moment, everything shifted. She wasn't just a machine. She wasn't just a product of her world. She was someone who, despite everything, still longed for something more. And that something more, whatever it was what would determine the future of their strange, unlikely marriage. "I want to help you, Lyra," David said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "I don't know where this will go, but I want to try. I want to figure this out. Together." Lyra's silver eyes softened further, and for the first time David saw something like hope in them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And in that moment, David realized that they weren't just part of some plan anymore. They were two people, trying to make something real out of the impossible. The days that followed the revelation were tense, filled with uncertainty and quiet moments of reflection. David found himself walking a fine line between confusion and curiosity. The truth about Lyra had shifted everything he thought he knew about her, about their marriage, and about his place in this alien world. It was hard to imagine what their future would look like, especially when everything between them had started as a matter of duty rather than choice. But something had changed between them. Despite the heavy weight of their situation, there was a small flicker of something David couldn't quite name. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of trust. And maybe that was enough for now. David spent the next few days trying to understand more about his new wife. Not just the alien created to serve a purpose, but the woman who, in her own way, was trying to figure out what it meant to be human. They talked, sometimes in silence, other times in quiet, meaningful conversations that left both of them wondering what could be. Slowly, piece by piece, David began to see the person behind the cold facade. It wasn't easy. There were still times when Lyra seemed distant, as if her emotions were locked away behind a wall she didn't know how to tear down. But there were also moments, small moments, fleeting but real, when she let her guard slip. When her eyes softened, when her voice held more warmth than before, when her movements became less mechanical and more human. Those moments kept David going, kept him hopeful that there was more to their marriage than just duty. One afternoon, David decided to break from the routine. He didn't want to spend another day in the quiet, sterile palace, with its constant reminder of their strange circumstances. He wanted to show Lyra something more than the political alliance they were both trapped in. He wanted to offer her a glimpse of something different. "Lyra," David called softly, his voice breaking the silence. She was sitting near the window again, as she often did, her eyes distant as she gazed out at the stars. The sight was mesmerizing, but it always made David feel more distant from her, more isolated. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes meeting his, with the calm, steady gaze that had become familiar to him. "Yes, David?" she asked, her voice as composed as ever. "I was thinking," he began, hesitating for a moment. "Maybe we could go out, get some fresh air, explore the palace gardens. I think it might help us get to know each other better. We've been so caught up in everything, and I just want to spend a little time with you. not as a representative, not as a created being, but just as two people, trying to figure things out. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her silver eyes studying him. She said nothing, and for a second David thought she might refuse or worse, not understand what he meant. But then slowly, her lips parted, and she nodded. "I think I would like that, David." David's heart lifted a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He offered his hand to her, and after a brief hesitation she took it. Her hand felt warm against his, and for a fleeting moment David felt the distance between them narrow. They walked through the hallways of the palace, their footsteps echoing in the vast, quiet space. David couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the sterile beauty of the palace and the warmth he hoped to find between him and Lyra. The hallways were lined with shimmering walls, glowing with soft, golden light. Everything was perfect, pristine, and yet David felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The palace felt as though it were designed for show, for appearances, not for real connection. As they stepped outside, the air felt cooler, fresher, and the wide expanse of the gardens greeted them with the soft rustling of alien plants and flowers. The gardens were as beautiful as the palace, another perfect creation, this one for the eyes of the Zyrexian elite. But David wasn't looking at the flowers or the plants. He was looking at Lyra. They walked side by side through the gardens, the silence between them now less oppressive. For the first time, David felt a sense of calm. Maybe it was the setting, or maybe it was the fact that they weren't surrounded by the weight of politics and expectations. Whatever it was, the quiet felt less lonely. After a while, they reached a quiet spot beneath a large tree, its branches stretching out like delicate silver tendrils. The branches were lined with small glowing flowers that lit up the space around them in a soft, comforting light. David stopped and turned to face Lyra. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, his voice quiet. "About what comes next, after all of this is over?" Lyra looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I have never been given the luxury of thinking about the future in the way you do, David. My purpose has always been about the present. I was created to serve, to ensure peace. My future is not mine to decide." David's heart sank, but he didn't let it show. "But you're a person, Lyra. You deserve more than just following orders. You deserve to live, to experience things beyond the plan you were given. Don't you ever want that?" There was a long pause before Lyra spoke, and when she did, her voice was quieter than before. "I was never taught to want things, David. I was taught to fulfill my purpose. But now that I am with you, I am beginning to understand what it means to want, what it means to choose." David took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. "I don't know what the future holds, Lyra. I don't know what comes next for us, but I want to try. I want to build something real with you, even if it's hard. Even if we're from different worlds, I want to learn about you, about what you feel, what you want." Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, David saw something in her that wasn't just duty or obligation. There was something like hope, something faint but real. "I want that too, David. I want to learn what it means to be more." They stood there for a long time, the soft glow of the alien flowers surrounding them as the stars twinkled above. In that moment, David felt a flicker of something that felt real, something that wasn't about politics or duty or the expectations placed on them. It was about them. Two people from different worlds trying to figure out what it meant to be together. And as they stood there, the future seemed a little less uncertain. The days that followed the quiet walk through the gardens were filled with more small, meaningful moments. David and Lyra spent time together in ways that neither of them had expected. They shared meals, long conversations, and even quiet moments of silence. But there was something different in the air. The tension between them had started to dissipate, replaced by an unspoken understanding. It wasn't love yet, but it was something more than just duty. David found himself slowly growing fond of Lyra, not just because of the physical attraction, which was undeniable, but because of the woman she was becoming in his eyes. She was not the cold, distant being she had once seemed. With each passing day, she showed him pieces of herself. Small smiles, subtle gestures, and moments of vulnerability that she had kept hidden beneath her perfect, calm exterior. But even as they grew closer, David could sense the weight of Lyra's past, the burden of her purpose. She had been created for a single reason, to bridge the gap between two worlds, to ensure the success of the Zyrexian human alliance. Her entire existence had been planned, mapped out for her. She had never had the chance to choose her own path, her own desires, and yet despite all of that, she was trying to find a new path, one where she could choose her own destiny. It was a slow journey, and David knew that there would be many more challenges ahead. But for now, he was content with the small steps they were taking. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when Lyra would retreat into herself, when the wall of detachment would go back up. But David didn't give up. He understood now that it wasn't something he could rush. Lyra had been shaped by forces beyond her control, and it would take time for her to fully understand herself and what she wanted from the world. One evening, as they sat together in their private quarters, Lyra looked at David with a serious expression on her face. She had been quiet for most of the day, lost in thought. But now, her silver eyes were focused on him, her gaze deep and searching. "David," she said softly, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking. I know I've been distant at times. I know I haven't always shown you what you might want to see. But I'm learning. I'm trying to understand what it means to truly connect with someone. What it means to be with you." David smiled, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in his heart. "I know, Lyra. I've noticed the changes. You're not the same as you were when we first met. You're opening up, and I appreciate it. More than you know." Lyra's eyes softened at his words. "It's not easy for me, David. My whole life has been about fulfilling a duty. I've been trained to think of others before myself, to place the needs of the Alliance above all else. But now I'm beginning to see that there's more. There's more to life than duty. There's more to us than just this marriage." David nodded, his heart warming at her words. "I think you're right," he said, his voice steady. "There's so much more. And we don't have to figure it all out in a day. We have time. Time to learn about each other. Time to grow. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Then, after a long pause, she stood up and walked over to the large window that overlooked the palace gardens. She gazed out at the stars, her silhouette bathed in the soft light. David stood up too and followed her. He didn't need to say anything. He simply stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. They both looked out at the stars, the same stars that had been there when they first arrived on this strange planet, yet they now felt different. The vastness of space no longer seemed so cold and empty. For the first time, it felt like there was a connection, something more than just the political ties between their worlds. "I never thought I'd end up here," Lyra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. I've spent my life fulfilling a role, a plan that was never mine to choose, but now I'm beginning to wonder if there's more. If I can choose something else. If I can choose you." David's heart skipped a beat at her words. For the first time, he saw the raw honesty in her eyes. The walls she had built around herself were slowly coming down, piece by piece. And though the path ahead was uncertain, there was something in her gaze, something that told him they were on the right track. "You don't have to choose me, Lyra," David said, his voice full of understanding. "You don't have to choose anything right now. All I want is for you to be happy, for you to find a life that's yours, not one that's been decided for you. If that life includes me, then I'll be here. But if not, I'll still support you. You don't have to make any decisions yet. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with something David couldn't quite describe. It was a mixture of relief, hope, and uncertainty. She took a step closer to him, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "Thank you, David," she said softly. "I never thought I'd hear those words from anyone, especially not from you, but I think you're right. I need time. Time to figure out who I am, who I want to be. And maybe, just maybe, I'll figure out what it means to truly be with someone, to have a real connection." David smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "We'll figure it out together, Lyra. We're not alone in this. Not anymore." As they stood there looking out at the stars, David felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The future was still uncertain, and there were many questions left unanswered. But for the first time, he felt like they were moving forward. Not as strangers bound by duty, but as two people trying to build something real, something of their own. And that, he realized, was the first step toward a new beginning.